let's assume that we have a negative aggregate supply shock, which we can call it supply-driven recession. An example of this one is a higher production cost, such as higher energy cost. So let's draw our long-run aggregate supply curve, which is a vertical line, our upward short-run aggregate supply curve, and our downward aggregate demand curve. All the three curves intersect at the same point. That's why we have an equilibrium point at A. This will give us our potential output at our natural rate of unemployment, and this is our inflation level. So if we have a negative aggregate supply shock, so I know that short-run aggregate supply will shift to the left. So at this point, we have a new point of intersection between aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply 2 at point B. This will give us here an inflation level at pi 2, which is a higher inflation level, and lower output level. At this lower output level, I know that we produce less than our full employment output. Consequently, our unemployment rate is bigger than natural rate of unemployment, which will cause a recessionary gap. Therefore, we know that higher cost, it means that our production cost will be higher, so short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left. This would result in higher prices, lower output, higher unemployment. So at the same time, we have higher output, lower output. This results in higher prices and higher unemployment. Therefore, both of these two is called stagflation, when we have both higher inflation and higher unemployment at the same time. Because usually, we have a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, as we will study in Phillips curve. So in this case, we have stagflation. Therefore, based on this case, let's assume that we need to use our monetary policy and fiscal policy to stabilize the economy. So let's assume that we will have an expansionary fiscal policy because we have a recession. So expansionary fiscal policy means higher government spending or lower taxes. So we know that our aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. If we increase G, so aggregate demand will be higher. If we decrease taxes, so disposable income will be higher. Consequently, consumption will be higher, which would result in higher aggregate demand. Therefore, aggregate demand will shift to the right. So I will look at the point of intersection between long-run aggregate supply curve and short-run aggregate supply 2, which is point C. So I know that aggregate demand will shift to the right, and this would result in an equilibrium level where the three curves intersect at the same point. This will give us our potential output at natural rate of unemployment or NAIRU and a higher inflation level at pi 3. Or given the same situation, we can use monetary policy. So we will use an expansionary monetary policy because we have a recession by increasing money supply or decreasing interest. If we decrease interest, this would result in higher investment because there is always a negative relationship between interest and investment, which we call it reverse crowding out. Therefore, our aggregate demand formula is C plus I plus G plus NX. If investment will go up, aggregate demand will go up. So I know that aggregate demand will shift to the right. So I will look at the point of intersection between long-run aggregate supply and short-run aggregate supply 2, this point C. So aggregate demand will shift to the right to intersect at this point. And this would give us a new equilibrium at potential output, at natural rate of unemployment, and a higher inflation level at pi 3.